Yup, you read that title right. I, a now 20-year-old female, was 13 at the time that this story takes place. It was the summer between 7th and 8th grade for me, which would make the year 2016, and I just moved to a new city about an hour away from where I grew up. To help me make friends before the school year started, my mom signed me up for a day camp in the new town over the summer. At this camp, I actually did develop a small friend group, but the only one that matters to this story would be Jay, a 14-year-old male. I'm gonna be honest, Jay was always more flirty with me than I was comfortable with, and I expressed that several times, but I always tried to minimize confrontation when I did so. Hindsight is 2020. I should have cut off the friendship when it was clear that he wasn't respecting my boundaries. But I was a lonely kid and all my other new friends acted like it was normal. Well, one day the rest of the friend group wasn't there. One was sick and the other two were siblings whose family had taken a day trip. And Jay and I were hanging out alone in the gym. We were sitting off to the side talking, but the gym was full of other kids and counselors. He said that he had a secret to tell me and asked me to lean in closer. As soon as I did, he grabbed me and pushed me down to the ground and got on top of me. In front of the whole gym, he was trying to kiss me, while also trying to use the hand that he wasn't holding me down with to fiddle with the button to my pants. I yelled at him to stop and to get off me, but no. I thrashed around and made it as difficult for him as possible to do what he was attempting to do. But he still wouldn't stop, and none of the counselors gave me a second look. I thought that in a room full of people, nobody was going to stop him, and I knew that if somebody didn't, he was going to fully overpower me and follow through. I was still trying to fight him off when a group of about 4 or 5 kids from the younger age group, who had previously been playing badminton, saw what was going on and decided to take it into their own hands since nobody else would help me. I want to stress to you guys that these kids were from the 6 to 9 age group. None of them looked a day older than 8, but these kids brought their little rackets with them and rallied around me. I heard a little chorus of voices yelling, "Get off of her! Stop it, you big butthead!" And one prominent, she said no. While I watched 2 rackets slide between our faces, they were trying to pry his face off of my face. The other kids took their rackets and just went ham on Jay, hitting the crap out of him. At first, he was so focused on his goal that he just swatted at them, hitting the kids back and continuing to try to force himself onto me. But these kids were not letting up. And the combination of me thrashing and the kids hitting him was making this a lot harder than he had thought it would be. So after about 5 minutes of this, Jay decided that it simply wasn't worth it anymore. He got off of me and he walked away. And to this day, I still think about it a lot. It was obviously traumatic for me. Not only that a friend tried to do that to me, but that the adults in the room that were supposed to protect me completely ignored what was going on. It's sick to think that these young kids cared more about my autonomy than the adults. But at the same time, it gives me a little bit of hope for the future, to know that the younger kids of this generation are being taught to care about others in this way. Those kids now would be about the age that I was when it happened, and I wonder about how they're doing all the time. I wonder if they ever think about what they did for me that day. I hope they know how grateful I am. I can't say I'm glad that this happened by any means, but in a way I'm grateful that it gave me the opportunity to see the next generation in action and boost my faith in humanity. I was watching YouTube videos about true scary stories and I realized that I had a perfect story for it. This happened about a week ago, so I had biked to school with my best friend. We were going to stay after school to work on a project together anyway, so it worked out. On our bike ride home from school, we decided not to go straight home, and that what we wanted to do was go on a small bike ride down a path by the park that would lead us back to my house anyways. When we were unchaining our bikes from the bike racks, I noticed a red Dodge Dakota across from the school. Just an FYI, we live in a pretty small town, so most of the kids who get picked up, we know what kind of cars they get into, and what cars hang around the school at pickup time, as well as what cars the teachers and students that drive themselves to school look like. Or at least somewhat of an idea, but I usually didn't see that one before. And it was probably like an hour and a half past the time that school had gotten out. But it could have been somebody's relative picking them up, or whatever, so I really didn't put that much thought into it. We started biking towards our path, and after about 5 minutes, my friend told me the red truck was driving on the road next to the sidewalk that we were biking on, but it was a little behind us. I told her that it was probably fine and just a coincidence, and that they're probably going home or they live around here, so we kept on going. But he didn't stop after about 10 more minutes of him still following us, and then I started getting a little concerned. We ended up continuing until we got to a gas station because then at least there would be people around and less of a chance of something happening. So we parked our bikes and went in, and we grabbed a drink and a snack, and did so to not make it look odd that we were in there. But while we were inside, I called my brother to come and get us, and that there was somebody following us. He told us that he would be right there and to just stay inside. And so we did, and we paid for our snacks and told the cashier about it, and she let us just sit there until my brother finally arrived. My brother pulled in, and so we walked out to get our bikes when we couldn't find them, and we looked around and saw the red truck pulled behind the gas station with our bikes right next to it. The man that was driving it was looking right at us, and we went and told my brother. He said forget about the bikes and to just get in the car. And so we did, and my brother got out of the car and went into the gas station to get the employee. And while he was doing that, the man sped off out of the back parking lot of the gas station. When my brother came out, he said that the gas station worker was going to check back the cameras and see if she could see or maybe get a license plate to give to the authorities, and that my brother gave her our mom's information for any updates. We both made it home safe, and I'll keep y'all updated when we find out more. I'm on a holiday with my boyfriend and our dog in the Lake District. We had been for a meal and was on our way back to the Airbnb. I had had a parcel strategically delivered to a supermarket, so I went in first, and then my boyfriend went in to buy beer and some groceries while I waited outside with the dog. It was dark, and as it's the off-season, there weren't that many people around. About 5 minutes into waiting on the pavement, an early 40s man wearing a red shell suit type ensemble walked past. I accidentally caught eye contact, so I smiled weakly, and he leered creepily back as he passed. I watched him walk away as he got to the end of the shop, and he bellowed, "Victims, victims, everybody's a victim." About 10 to 20 seconds after that, too, he started singing, "Take me down to the paradise city where the grass is green and the girls are pretty." He went around the corner, and I thought that that was it. My boyfriend was taking too long at this point, so I tried to get his attention through the glass door. And then I saw that same guy coming back up the road heading straight towards me. I really didn't want to have another run-in with this guy, so I went into the supermarket, completely ignoring the no dogs allowed rule, and I made an animated display so that both he and the cashier knew that I was there. When my boyfriend came out, I explained what had happened and pointed out the guy who was staggering uphill in the direction that we needed to go. I suggested that we hang back for a bit and we keep our distance. He eventually turned off down a side road, and that was the last that we saw of him. For the entire walk back, I was turning around to make sure that we weren't being followed. Even now, as we're sat watching Die Hard, I'm really creeped out. I know that I was probably in no danger, but it's a really weird thing to shout at a lone woman with a little dog. Today, on the 14th of September 2023, I saw the thing that scared me the most as a kid. Nobody knew who he was and where he came from. I was the only one to realize who he was. When I was 5, I lived in a small town in between two major cities. It was a simple town but a nice one. A big park, a small mall with all the basic shops, and a small primary school. I used to go to that school until the 3rd grade. The event of this story takes place 2 years before that. When I got into the 1st grade, my parents decided to call my best friend's mother. The goal of the call was for me and my friend, let's call her A, to walk together to school since we both lived close to the school, less than a kilometer. Keep in mind that we were both 5 years old. We first did walk the path with our parents for the first week. Everything went smooth and we both loved walking with our parents and having fun. The first months of me and A walking to school went smoothly. We both waited for one another at the local golf club's parking lot and walked to school. Fast forward to February. That morning I went outside in my puffy snowsuit and waited at the parking lot like I usually did. I waited 5 minutes and then 10 and then 15 minutes. I noticed that she wasn't coming from down the road. My parents didn't warn me about that, did they? I decided to still go on my merry way. And oh boy was I wrong to do that. I should have come back home to tell my mom or something. As I walked down the road, I passed a house that always made me feel uncomfortable. It was a big house, 3 stories high and made of a dark brown brick, and the windows were blocked with bed sheets. The parking lot was filled with trash and old toys that were discolored by the sun. As I walked past it, I heard a door open. Soon after, I heard a man call to me. "Hey, come over here," he said in a weird, kid-friendly voice. I turned around to see who it was, and it was this weird tall man with long and slick ginger hair. He had a metalhead haircut and he was wearing a black hoodie with some disgusting jeans, and nothing more but Crocs on his feet. "I have something to show you, bud. Come inside, I have something for you," he said with a smile on his face. I never personally experienced something like this, but I remembered my dad telling me, if anyone you don't know asks you to follow them in their car or inside their house, do not follow them. So as I heard what that man said, I started running as fast as I could. When I turned to the street corner, something had grabbed a hold of me though. He grabbed me. He was holding onto my shoulder and he turned me around to face him. The smell of his hair was horrible, a mix between rotten eggs and cigarettes. I looked at him for a split second before deciding to make another run for it. I was able to get free and I arrived at the crossroad next to my school, and I ran straight for the school crossing guard. I explained what had happened and she took me to the school with her. When I was finally in the building, I told my teacher right away. My teacher was in utter shock to hear that and went into the principal's office to get somebody to come and get me. The school's specialized education teacher took me to the staff meeting room afterwards to speak about the situation. My parents were called, but my dad was not able to come to school. My mom, on the other end, came as quickly as she could. When my mom arrived, I bursted into tears and hugged her because I was scared of being kidnapped. The whole situation was explained to my mom, and 2 police officers were called to the school because my mom wanted to press charges against the man. When the officers had asked about the description, they had stopped and one said, "Oh yeah, we know who that is. We call him Elmo." My mom took a second and looked really confused. As a kid, the only thing that was close to Elmo was that red little monster thing, and I remember being confused as well. My mom then spoke. Who the heck is this Elmo? And why would he grab my son like that? The teacher tried to talk, but the officers started arguing and the room was filled with loud voices of both my mom and the officers. After they were done, the teacher said something that still makes me mad to this day. Listen, officers, he didn't mean to lie to you. She was talking about me. It's all just a big misunderstanding. Children these days have a tendency to lie a lot. The teacher looked at me and told me, "Go ahead and tell the officers that it was all a made-up story, that you simply imagined things because you were alone and scared." She was looking at me with knives instead of eyes. Of course, I tried to defend myself, but she didn't want to hear what I had to say. In the end, I was pressured into lying about my lie. The officers gave me a warning and a good old verbal beating. My mom knew that I wasn't lying and took the matter into her own hands. That day I went home in the morning and my mom decided to make me skip a whole week of school to think about what I did. Now fast forward 15 years. I now work as a cook in a pub. Today was a good day as usual. I greeted the clients like I normally did and kept working in the kitchen. At some point during the day, my colleague said, "Dang, look at that guy's hair, that stuff is crazy long." So, out of curiosity, I peeked through the door frame, but I couldn't really see anything. I went behind the counter and it hit me like a truck in the chest. It was him. To confirm my theory, I took off my apron to serve him and take care of his order. At some point during the time, he had asked to open up a tab and to get a beer. I asked him what was the name for the tab and he said, "Oh, just call me Elmo. That's what all my friends call me." I backed up and went into the office to catch my breath. I honestly felt like I was going to be sick. I sat down on my laptop in the office and I looked up Elmo police reports and then the city that I'm located in. I found something that made me sick. This guy was a registered SO into CR, and he was incarcerated from 2009 to 2022. That meant that he just came out of jail and he walked freely. I felt like my heart was going to explode. I left work and told my trainee to fill in for me. When I got home, I called my mom and I told her everything. She then told me something that I never knew. The reason why I skipped an entire week of school. She told me that when we got back home, she contacted my uncle who was in the police with the canine units. He went to Elmo's house with 3 of his buddies and 2 canine units to search the place. The house was filled with pictures and paintings of horrible things. In the end, they pretty much caught him red-handed, and he was sent to jail. It's ironic. But now he walks freely and he came into my pub. As for now though, I'm home and safe. I don't know what to do if he comes in again, but one thing is for sure. I won't be sleeping tonight. Peace out, everyone. It isn't very creepy but more scary, and I didn't know who to share it with. I was driving down a 2-lane street with my windows open late at night. A car pulled up next to me in the other lane full of men. They started catcalling me through the windows. Naturally, I ignored them and started to slow down. Suddenly, the guy in the passenger seat hurled a large concrete block right at me. If I wasn't watching, it would have gone right through my open window and into me. But instead, it went under my car, missed my tire, and took out 2 cars behind me. They both lost a tire. The concrete block had to be 20 to 30 pounds, and it had metal rods sticking out of it. It scared the heck out of me. My fiance keeps saying that if I was a man, they still would have done it. but they wouldn't have slowed down to catcall me at all if I was a man. Why do men do this? This story is something that I think about from time to time and it creeps me out. So I'm writing this to get it off my chest. So anyways, let's begin. Almost 3 years ago, I was 17 at this point and was accustomed to being in horrible situations, as all I had was my mother and she did not hold down a job for long because she had her own issues to tackle. And so as I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had our own place to stay except twice, but that didn't last long either, and we would be forced into a new environment with a snap of a finger. So when I was 17, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again, and I was so used to it at this point as I had slept in the street more than I'd like. The day comes when we have to leave our roommate's house, and my mom is able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer. I had nowhere to go as I had no friends at this point, as I had halted my friendships because they were bad for my health and my mental state and were overall just toxic. My mom offered me to go with her, but I didn't want to, as I felt like getting between my mom and her boyfriend was kind of weird. Plus, I'm used to the street and I didn't think it was that bad at that time. So here we are, and I get dropped off at a McDonald's and I eat some burgers before I go off into the streets once more. Eventually, the sun fled and darkness was all that remained, and so I looked for a place to sleep for the night. I went into many places that night trying to sleep, but none of them were working because it was either too hot or the lights were too bright or the mosquitoes were biting me. That's when I remember a house that I used to go into to chill in. This house was under construction and nearly finished, so the doors all shut and the windows were all settled so there were no mosquitoes. I go through the back like I always do and I make my way upstairs. Eventually, I settle in the bathroom because there is less debris on the floor. So I lay there and I try to sleep. Eventually, I hear some sounds downstairs, but I didn't think anything of it. I figured it was the door that I came through swinging open and closed or something. Eventually, after laying there for maybe an hour, I open up my phone and look at old photos of my life, thinking about how I messed it up and that how I got to this point and how I had lost everything. The noises were still happening this entire time, but I paid no mind to it. Eventually, for whatever reason, I get up and I go to sit down on the back porch because I couldn't get to sleep. I make my way downstairs and out the back door to the porch. I'm messing around on my phone for maybe 5 minutes when it happens. I see movement to my left from the back door that I just exited from. I glance over and time itself freezes. At first, I think that it's an illusion, but I was in fact wrong. I see a man shrouded in darkness peering past the wall inside to gaze at me. His lower half of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I could not see anything but his upper body. The rest of his body is leaning to the left, peeking behind this wall, almost like the man was trying not to let me see his full body, as it would make his presence known. The man was a pure black silhouette, and I could not make out any features. After noticing him, I just sat there and stared at him for what seemed like forever, but it was probably a minute or two. I expected him to come outside and talk to me because I normally talk to a lot of homeless people, and I thought that the man was just homeless. He didn't come outside though. He had not moved at all, actually. He was as still as a statue and quiet as a mouse. Maybe if I had not noticed him, he would have stared at me the entire time. Eventually, after staring at him, I got up and got on my bicycle and made my way out of the property. As I'm walking out of the backyard, I peer into the window that is next to the door that I saw the man in. The moonlight revealed the man was still there, only now he was watching me walk off the property. I could tell because the moonlight revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his left eye gazing at me. He was a white male who was very tall and had a jacket of some kind on. I couldn't make out many details because he was still cloaked in darkness. After seeing this, I just moved a little faster out of there. I got to the front of the house on the street and I looked inside to see if I could see him again, but I couldn't. I got on my bicycle and I waved goodbye to the house because I figured the man was still watching me. And then I drove away. For the rest of the night, I could not sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. This is where the story ends. I know I didn't have a crazy chase or fight to the death or anything, but this was real life and it's not the same as the movies or books. I don't know what the man was doing in there. I assume he was trying to sleep like I was, but the way that he was staring at me was very unnerving. It makes me wonder how long the man was in the house for and what would have happened if I had actually fallen asleep. Would he have stared at me while I was asleep, completely blinded to his presence? Or did he have other intentions? I will never know, but now I don't go into houses like that anymore at all after this experience. This happened around 2018, right after my sister moved out of our apartment together. It's been bothering me since I just moved out. I was home alone on my day off when somebody knocked on my door. No one ever visits and I have anxiety, so that was terrifying to me already. I answered and it was a woman who lived in one of the basement apartments. She seemed nice at first, asking if I wanted any clothes that she was giving away because they weren't her style, but supposedly matched mine perfectly as a young woman. That was already a red flag in my mind because the only time that I ever saw her was when I was walking to work, wearing my uniform of a black shirt, black pants, and a black hat. But I let her talk because I'm super awkward and I hated being rude to technical strangers. But then she started getting pushy and listing off super expensive name brands to try to get me to go to her apartment. It's an old small building with no cameras and I live on the top floor, which would be down what I call the creepy stairs and next to the door to the back lot that nobody ever used. And then I realized she was holding a notebook open with a script of what to say. I continued to reject, but my anxiety wouldn't let me close the door on her face without fear of her lashing out. She kept insisting until I finally told her that my boyfriend was going to be home soon and suggested that she donated them. My boyfriend wasn't going to be home for many hours, but she didn't need to know that, obviously. So she leaves and I go back to my room, which has a window facing that back lot/alleyway. A few moments later, I hear a fight happening in the lot, and I see her with the previous, he was already fired at that point, maintenance man. It's a loud, screaming fight, and they're standing next to his truck, which has tinted windows and a covered truck bed. My paranoia went a little wild, so I texted my family about it just to feel a bit safer. And then I believe that he left. But a little while later, something hit my door pretty hard. I didn't check, just stared. And then it happened again and again, all night until my boyfriend came home, and for a few days when I was alone. I found out after looking at the door that they were hitting my deadbolt and it was off-center. Even after it was replaced, the damage could not be fixed. It stopped after a little while and the woman moved out almost immediately after all that. I don't want to feed my paranoia, but something obviously was not right. I know that I should have called the police, but I have horrific phone anxiety too. Everybody thought that I was overreacting, and police in my town are relatively useless. Also, that maintenance man was rehired and was the one who replaced my deadbolt. insisting he kept the extra key despite never needing the old one. My new house is much safer, thankfully. Over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in the small town that I'm from. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job, that's for certain. So I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectation about the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home, as I had 2 children at home and many things that I could work on there. The job wasn't hard and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered, so I really couldn't complain. I worked second shift for about 5 months and then I went to day shift. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly until one day. I met somebody from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. For the sake of staying anonymous, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy and we had a lot of things in common. I went home that night and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook. Again, another oddity, so I decided to add him. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did hang out. Pretty often, too. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day, he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed decent at first, super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. One time, we were talking at a restaurant, and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's so awful sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take out the trash and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I've never been in a relationship where somebody's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course, we had only been friends for a month, so I thought that maybe he was being morbid, jokingly so I kind of chuckled at him. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking, she really did." And that concerned me. Fast forward about 8 months, they're still together and we all hang out pretty often, forgetting the things that he told me then. One day we were all talking and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He flashed a smirk and said, "Oh, nothing, dude, just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me though. He had them on her when I asked that. When we went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" "Of course," I agreed. He said that he was breaking up with her and she went a little crazy. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at him and said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go, then you can come stay with me until you get her out of the house." Fast forward to another year and he finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time he told her over text. She said that she was going to find him and kill him, and he was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Hey, let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding. She actually did come to our job and she asked me where he was, and I said, "Oh, I have no idea. I thought that he was with you and you guys went out of town or something." All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I called him and told him that she came by and he called the police about it. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. When he had called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He said, "I would take some vacation days if I were you." Dumbfounded, I asked him why. He said to me, well, because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people that she has personal vendettas with, and you're one of them. At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids and went out of town. Took 2 weeks off of work. Come to find out the next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. I got the news about it the day after it had happened. The reason why he knew they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. Everybody regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. 3 of the names on that list were the people that were shot. The 4th name on that list, well, it was mine. After they found the evidence and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided to not inform anybody else on it. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore and I dodged a bullet. Literally. My wife and I were talking about an experience the other night about being followed by a red truck, and she reminded me of this story as well. It's mildly interesting, so I figured that I would share it. My girlfriend and I were graduate students living together in a 6-unit apartment building with an outside stairwell. It was an older Victorian home that had been converted into apartments. The whole street was lined with similar buildings. It was off campus but conveniently located within walking distance of bars, a coffee shop, and several restaurants. The neighborhood had a laid-back bohemian vibe. The tenants were a mixture of college kids, young professionals, and families. The area was generally safe, but it wasn't too far from a rougher section of town. It was a Thursday night, and being the night owl that I am, it was past 3 a.m. and I had just finished a movie. I turned the TV off and went to the stairwell for a quick smoke before bed. We were in the middle of a snowstorm. The ground was covered in 6 inches of fresh powder and it was freezing, scary cold. I quickly smoked my cigarette and rushed back inside. My girlfriend was always complaining about me forgetting to lock the door, and as was my habit, I left the door unlocked. I jumped into bed and just as I was falling asleep, I thought that I heard a noise. I brushed it off at first, but then I heard a creak. Probably just the wind, I concluded. But moments later, I heard the floorboards creaking. Now I was listening intently. My girlfriend felt me shuffling and asked what was wrong. I told her that I thought that I heard something, and then we both heard what sounded like somebody stumbling into our couch. We shot up and I yelled, "Is someone there?" No answer, but the floor creaked again. This time in unison we shouted, "Who's there?" Another noise, and I quietly stood up and scanned the room for something that could be used as a weapon. Nothing. Growing up, my dad always kept a baseball bat under his bed, and I regretted not adopting this practice. We yelled again, but there was no response. Again, but this time from the darkness, we were greeted by a low-pitched, incomprehensible growl. I wondered if it was one of my buddies playing a prank on me, but that seemed out of character for my friends, especially at this hour on a weekday night and during a snowstorm. What I really thought was that a crackhead had wandered in. My girlfriend yelled, "Who's out there?" More footsteps. The intruder was still in the family room, but he was getting closer to her bedroom. We heard the growl again, but this time it was followed by a gurgle and, It's Matt." We didn't know any Matts, at least not any that would enter our apartment uninvited in the middle of the night. I looked at my girlfriend, and I had never seen someone more scared. If worst came to worst, I knew that I could outrun her, but I hoped it didn't come to that. "Matt who?" we shouted repeatedly. After a long pause, he finally said, "Matt, I'm friends with Mike and Kelly." Relief washed over both of us. Mike and Kelly were our neighbors. I turned on the lights and walked into the family room, and there he stood, a 6'2" looking college kid. Matt was blacked out drunk. Our neighbors had hosted a pregame party at their apartment, followed by a trip to the nearby bars. They had abandoned Matt, and despite the storm, he had found his way back to their apartment. Their door was locked and his phone calls had gone unanswered. His evolutionary drive to survive had kicked in, and he sought warmth in the first unlocked apartment that he could find. I told him that he scared the crap out of us and that he had to go. He stepped outside, and I quickly locked the door behind him. The next day, I learned that Matt froze to death. He had been discovered by another neighbor, huddled next to her car under the lean-to garage. I'm just kidding. I have no idea what happened to Matt. I do, however, remember being a little concerned for him after my nerves had settled. This happened a long time ago when I was approximately 13. My family and I were on vacation in Cape May, New Jersey. It had stormed the night before, and I remember being excited for some body surfing because somebody at the hotel had mentioned that the waves were larger than normal. We arrived at the beach, set up camp, and my younger brother and I rushed into the freezing cold waters of the Atlantic Ocean. For the first 30 minutes it was great. The waves tossed and turned us as planned. A pain, however, had started to form in my swimsuit. At first, I attributed it to the cold water. As any man can tell you, cold water not only causes shrinkage, but it can also make those things ache a bit. I decided that I just needed to get acclimated, and I continued enjoying the waves. After another 15 minutes or so, the pain became more acute. This time, with my arms concealed underwater, I inspected what was going on down there. As I poked around, I discovered sand and debris had collected at the bottom of my swimsuit's netting. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, so I cleared out the debris and continued to attribute the pain to the cold. About 10 more minutes pass, and my nuts are throbbing in pain at this point. Cold water has never had this effect on me in my short life. With my back to the shore, I performed a visual inspection. Everything looked fine, and so I cleared out some more debris, but upon doing this, I noticed a pebble that I must have missed. I grabbed it and a pain shot through my entire body. This was no pebble. It was a clam, and it had an iron grip on the bottom of my you-know-what. I remembered hearing jokes about fish mistaking something for a worm, but the thought of a clam with the taste for barnacles was a horror that I never could have imagined. I am now in a state of panic. I grab my brother and tell him that we've got to go. I rush out of the water and tell my parents the same thing. At first, they protested that they had only just arrived, but I insisted that we had to leave now, and they realized that something was wrong. I'm in such a frenzy that I almost demanded to be taken directly to the emergency room. The thought of explaining my plight to a receptionist dissuaded me, though. My parents pepper me with questions on our long walk back to the hotel. Did you see something or get stung by a jellyfish? I found it hard to articulate my shame. I'm at an awkward age when everything is embarrassing, let alone having a clam latched to your manhood. My concern trumps my humiliation, and I describe what has happened, or is happening. My parents are concerned, and my younger brother is crying, with laughter. The pain had only gotten worse as we entered a hotel. I rushed into the bathroom, locked the door, stripped off my suit, and finally got my first good look at the source of my pain. It was dark brown, oval-shaped, and a little bigger than a quarter, and it had an iron grip. Every time that I touched it, I felt waves of pain. The knocks of my parents at the door and the sound of my brother laughing echoed throughout the bathroom. My parents wanted to come in to see it, but my shame would not allow it. I told them that I couldn't get the clam off and I didn't know what to do. So I started to consider the emergency room again. Finally, my mom sent my dad to a nearby pharmacy to get some rubbing alcohol. They passed it through to me and I filled up a glass. I sat in that bathroom with my clam dangling in a glass of rubbing alcohol for at least 10 minutes. The clam never fully gave up its prize, and I think the alcohol weakened its resolve. So with a quick, extremely painful tug, I was finally free. My sack had a minor laceration that bled but was otherwise fine. Even after the events of that summer, I still love the ocean. But beware, sometimes that ache below is more than just the cold. This horror story happened over 5 years ago. Looking back on it, it's hilarious, but it was terrifying at the time. It was a Wednesday evening when one of my best friends, I'll call him Rob, had called. His fiancée was out of town on Friday and wouldn't be back until late Saturday, and he wanted to know if I would like to spend the night at his place. At this point in our lives, we were both in our late 20s with full-time jobs, and we lived in separate towns 2 hours apart with our respective fiancés. We rarely got to hang out, so I excitedly agreed. We had grown out of the bar scene but still wanted to get into some trouble, so we settled on tripping on mushrooms, which we had both previously done a handful of times. I had recently read that the famous writer Terence McKenna recommended that users take a heroic dose or 5 grams on an empty stomach to get the full experience. For those unfamiliar, this is a very large dose. I asked Rob if he'd be up for that, and he readily agreed. At this point, I think the most that I had taken at once was a little over 3 grams, and probably the same for Rob. The night before our visit, I procured the mushrooms, ground them up, and filled empty pill capsules with the grounds. I really don't like the taste. The next day, I got stuck at work later than I had hoped and didn't arrive at Rob's until around 10 p.m. We weren't going to let a little delay stop us though, so we each downed our heroic doses and tossed back a few more pills for good measure. In total, we probably took close to around 6.5 grams. Over the course of the next hour, the effects of the cyclopin became apparent. The walls appeared to breathe, there were a few giggles, and I specifically recall his speckled granite countertop swirling and eventually appearing to melt and drip over the edge. It was around this time that one of us suggested going on a walk. Rob lived in a quiet suburb of a large Midwest city. His apartment building was part of a large complex that was located right off of the town's main street. Think brick road, colonial buildings, coffee shops, boutiques, small restaurants, and so on. It's not a party area, and by the time that we departed, it was a ghost town. The walk started pleasant enough as we took in the beauty of our surroundings. Soon we noticed a cop seemed to be following us, eventually pulling into an empty parking lot with his lights pointed at us. This agitated both of us, but we continued on until we got to a busy intersection with a long crosswalk that was close to a highway off-ramp. The goal was the gas station on the other side. The mushrooms, however, would not let me cross the street. My feet were sinking into the sidewalk, and I feared the walk signal wouldn't give us enough time to safely make it across. I turned back the way that we came, but took a right down a side street to get away from the cop. The side street intersected with train tracks that Rob said were a shortcut back to his place. We started on the berm of the tracks until thick, thorny shrubbery on both sides forced us onto the tracks. A minute later, the sound of a train's horn echoed in the distance. 2 druggies die on tracks, is what the reporting would say, I had imagined, as I started running, imploring Rob to do the same, until I reached another street. Confused, Rob watched me as he stood there. There was no train, of course. He encouraged me to keep going, assuring me the tracks were safe, and that we were a minute from his place. I wasn't getting back on the track, so we ended up taking another way, delaying our journey by another 5 minutes, which annoyed Rob. We finally arrived back at his place and all appeared to be fine. It had been over 2 hours from consumption. Despite our little misadventure, I was still having a positive trip. I'm sitting on Rob's couch as it slowly consumes me. I'm peaking and I feel great. But this was not the case for Rob. At this point, I should probably add some additional context for the events that follow. Rob hadn't slept well the night before and had taken somewhere in the neighborhood of 90 milligrams or more of Adderall throughout the day. He probably wasn't in the best set, as they say, for a heroic dose. Within 15 minutes of arriving back at his place, as I'm reaching for higher planes of existence, Rob was being dragged down below. He started acting strangely, muttering something about surveillance. He began frantically going around his apartment, unplugging all of his electronics, his TV, Alexa, computer, so on. I thought that he was doing a bit at first and found it funny, but then I noticed he was beet red and sweating. He complained about how hot it was. It wasn't hot at all. He guzzled an entire bottle of water and then another, and then he rolled up his sleeves and situated himself under the air conditioning register in his hallway, all the while saying nonsensical, dark things. I'm sitting on his sofa watching all of this, tripping my balls off, not knowing what to make of it. Part of me still thought it was a bit. Maybe he was trying to freak me out for delaying our journey back. Rob's a sweet guy, but he's not above some dark humor. Suddenly, Rob collapsed, smacking his head on the corner of a wall. I leapt up and ran to him, and I tried pulling him up, but he's much heavier than I am. I'm shouting, Robbie, are you good?" But he's not responding. His eyes were glazed over and my heart was in my stomach, and for a moment I feared the worst. 15 seconds go by and he comes to. His eyes dart around the room. He touches the back of his head and realizes that he's bleeding. He's hysterical, screaming that he's not going to make it. So somehow in my frame of mind, I call an ambulance and Rob is taken to the hospital. The next day, Rob ends up being fine, but he has to explain everything to his fiancée, who isn't very happy. Plus, the worst part of it was the hospital bill. And despite this experience, I still take the occasional mushroom, and most of my experiences have been very positive. I believe that everybody should have a psychedelic experience at least once in their life, responsibly. For those who haven't, the importance of set and setting cannot be overstated. Make sure that you're well rested in a good mind space and in a comfortable surrounding. And it's never a bad idea to have a sober friend with you, especially if you're taking a large dose. Okay, so just to preface this was on Friday the 27th, and my friend and I just smoked cannabis before going out to eat and catch a movie. So my friend and I are in line at BK and trying to decide if we want to split a meal or get separate ones. My friend orders her food, and when I get to order, I get straight up asked if we had smoked weed. My first thought and question was, is it really that noticeable? Now I could barely hear this guy because he was speaking low, but he was asking about a certain strain that I could really care less about. But it gets to the point where he tells me how much I could get for a certain price point, which I said that I would keep in mind. Now my friend and I didn't spray any perfume or body spray. We normally do, but we just completely forgot to this time. I get to the table that my friend picked out and I start telling her about what had just happened. Not even a minute after I sit down, this guy comes over and passes me a folded up napkin of this weed to sample. Now my friend and I are just shocked and talking about this. I ended up putting the napkin in my bra because it was the only place that I could. I had no pockets. This guy ends up coming to our table 3 to 4 more times within the span of 15 or 20 minutes. When I went up to get my food before these other encounters had occurred, this guy had to let me know that he got off at 7:30 p.m. and asked if we wanted to hang out. I straight up said that my friend and I were on a date and that we were going to a movie straight after this. After I got my food, this guy stopped at our table to ask what movies were playing. What his name was, I don't remember what he said, just that it had something to do with California's state bird. And the other times I can't remember why he came over. He just spoke to me and not my friend, and I could tell that this guy was trying to get some information on me. Now, I'm a very private person and also a very cautious person. I could tell that this guy was trying something and I acted dumb, even though I knew what was going on. My friend had noticed that after the last time he came over that this guy was staring at me any time he passed by. I could tell that he was staring at me because of the windows that made a reflection, because my back was to him. It got to a point where I told my friend that we need to hurry because this was all making me uncomfortable. So we finished eating quickly and we left. Now my friend and I did originally go to the movie theater, but decided to watch the movie at home because of how busy it was. When we decided to watch the movie at my place, we tried to hurry and leave because of the time, and that guy was going to be getting off at any minute. I don't think that I'll be going to BK anytime soon because my hair color is blue. It's very noticeable and not many people have that color in my town. Plus, it's a small town. I hope to never meet this guy again, and if I do, I may have to have a backbone, especially if he acts like he did this time. About 3 years ago when I was 18, I worked as a waiter in a restaurant in the mall. I'm very introverted, but it never affected my relationship with my customers, but speaking to people I wasn't serving gave me major butterflies. I had just finished my shift around 5 and I was walking out when I noticed a woman who looked in pain, holding her stomach and was looking right at me. I had to walk past her to get to the exit and I was trying to avoid her because I wasn't looking for a conversation and I hated when people would ask for money. Yeah, I know it's selfish, but I worked really hard for the little money that the customers tipped me that day. I maneuvered my way around the people, but she called out to me. I acted like I didn't hear her and I moved faster. Eventually, she ran to me and grabbed my arm and cried, "Please, please, brother, I got children and I got cancer of the tummy." She lifted up her dirty shirt and showed me a large surgery wound across her stomach. I told her that I didn't have anything, but she continued to badger me. Eventually, I just ran to the stairs and went upstairs and saw her chasing, but I was way faster than her. She slowed down at the second case to catch her breath, and I turned into it to get off at the 3rd floor where she couldn't see me. I took the elevator next to the stairs back to the 1st floor so I could get to the exit. Eventually, I got to the bus stop and I was on my way home. When I got off at my stop, I went to the corner shop to get a piece of bread. At the end of the road, I saw the woman from the mall and her boyfriend. They must have definitely seen me even though I made an effort to take a longer way home so they wouldn't have seen me. Around 7 o'clock, I get a knock at my gate. I live in a house that has 2 slide gates in front of the main entrance. I look out the window and to my horror, I saw the woman and her boyfriend. I stayed quiet and hoped that they would just go away, but they stayed outside of my house for 2 hours until my parents arrived. They begged my parents for money or food to feed their kids. My father found it weird that they were there at that time of night, so he told them that we didn't have any and to get away from the house before they called the police. Surprisingly, they left without a hassle. I told my parents that these people were begging me for money at the mall and that they followed me home and stayed outside the house for over 2 hours. And we never saw him again after that day. This incident occurred a few years ago when I was in my early 20s. I had a part-time job that required me to work late, and since I didn't have a car, I relied on public transportation to get home. Most nights it was uneventful, but one particular evening stands out vividly in my memory. I had just finished my shift and made my way to the bus stop. It was past 11 p.m. by this point, and the area was unusually quiet. As I stood there checking the bus schedule on my phone, I noticed a man sitting only a few feet away from me, staring intently in my direction. His presence made me feel uneasy, but I tried to brush it off as simply being a bit paranoid. The man, probably in his late 30s, had a disheveled appearance. His eyes seemed fixated on me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching my every single move. Ignoring the discomfort, I continued looking on at my phone, pretending to be absorbed in the screen. Minutes passed and the bus was running late. As I glanced up from my phone, I noticed the man had moved closer. He was now standing just a few steps away, staring directly at me. I felt a surge of anxiety, but I didn't want to draw any attention to myself by making a scene out of it. Trying to appear nonchalant, I took a step back, closer to the edge of the well-lit bus stop area. The man mirrored my movements, and that's when my heart began to race. He started muttering something underneath his breath, his gaze fixed on me, and I realized that he was inching even closer to me. My instincts screamed out at me that something was not right. I tried to catch the eyes of the occasional passerby, hoping for someone to notice the situation, but it seemed that we were alone in that late night emptiness. The bus finally appeared around the corner, and relief washed over me. I quickly gathered my things, keeping an eye on the man, and I made a beeline for the bus doors. As I stepped onto the bus, the man hesitated for a moment and then abruptly turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I immediately alerted the bus driver about the unsettling encounter, and they assured me that they would keep an eye out. I found a seat near the front, feeling a mix of relief and lingering fear. Though nothing more happened that night, the incident left me shaken. I couldn't shake off the feeling that the man's intentions weren't entirely benign. From that night on, I made sure to be extra cautious when commuting late at night, always aware of my surroundings and never ignoring any gut feelings that warned of potential danger. So, this happened years ago when I was a dumb teenage girl who loved walking the city alone after dark. This took place in Eastern Europe for context, in a city with a tramway system. On this one night, I was in the station waiting to catch the last tram home. The 3 trams stopped at the station, 2 of which went where I was going. That'll be important for later. It was around 10 p.m. and as I sat there waiting, lost in thought, I barely registered a man quietly walking up and standing by the shelter. I thought nothing of it, just somebody else waiting for the tram, until I started feeling weird. The streets were quiet and dark and there was nobody else in sight. Just me and this guy, and I started wondering why he chose to stand this close to me when he had so much space to avoid dealing with people. I couldn't comprehend anybody wanting to socialize this late at night, and given that I wasn't very social myself. So I glanced at him, trying not to overthink it. He was a bald-headed, beady-eyed giant, tall and built like a bear, big belly and big arms and legs. I was 5'2" and scrawny, but that wasn't what scared me. It was the fact that he was staring right at me, unblinking and expressionless, not even attempting to look away or act embarrassed. No, this guy wanted me to feel uncomfortable. I instantly felt weak and shaky. Cold shivers ran down my spine. This was not normal. I realized quickly that I was not in a good situation. I couldn't miss the last tram. Walking home was out of the question, and my phone was almost dead. I was a shy kid and I didn't have what it takes to scare the guy away. I knew that, but I had to try at least. I only managed to utter a small "Hi," trying my best to startle him out of whatever he was thinking. But my attempt failed in the face of his silent and threatening aura. He kept staring, no sign of intent to reply. He was enjoying this. Feeling the panic rising inside me, I told myself to stay calm and think rationally. Maybe he didn't hear me. Minutes passed by as stare continued to burn on my skin, and there was no tram in sight. Ignoring him didn't work, so I mustered up the courage to speak once again, this time louder. "What do you want? Stop staring at me." No answer. He definitely heard me this time though. I felt myself start to get angry. I didn't want to let this guy get to me anymore. I didn't want to continue to give him the satisfaction of watching me squirm nervously and pretend that his behavior didn't bother me. I took a deep breath and I forced myself to start thinking. I knew what I can't do. I can't fight him off if he makes a move, and there's nothing that I can say or do that will get him to stop. I didn't know what his intentions were, but I knew that they weren't good. If I tried to walk away, he would probably follow. I could run, but he would most likely catch up to me before I could even tire him out, since his legs weren't much longer than mine. Even if I managed to somehow lose him, walking home through the dark alleys past the junkies and people that were always prowling about, it could land me in an even worse situation. I could pretend to call someone, but he might feel compelled to act much sooner if he felt threatened. So what can I do? The only thing I could realistically be able to do was to try and outsmart him somehow. So I started developing a few plans depending on which tram showed up, trying to confirm whether he was just amusing himself and actually waiting for the tram too, or popped over for other more suspicious reasons, and whether I could get any kind of help. I couldn't let him see where I lived, so if he followed me, I would have to be prepared to employ whatever strategy was available. And for that, I needed to stay rational and aware of my surroundings. While I was still thinking, the first tram showed up. It was the one that I could have taken home, but this one pulled into the depot right in my neighborhood, forcing me to lead him to my home. I hoped that he would board it and leave me be, but he didn't. He just kept watching me carefully. I let the tram go, desperately hoping that it wasn't the last one to head home. He continued to watch, and I sensed that he was quite happy with how things were going. I put up with it for another 15 minutes, trying to focus on another plan of action. I could now pretend that I needed the other tram, the one going to a different area of the city, and just ride to the next station and then get off as soon as possible, so I don't end up too far and miss the tram that I need. This tram showed up next. With my heart in my throat, I boarded it and sat down by the door. He got on it too, but sat by himself in the back, pretty far away from where I was. I let out a sigh of relief, thinking that this might still go well. When the tram reached the next station, I got up and out, not looking back and hoping that it was all over. But when I stepped on the pavement and watched the tram drive away, I couldn't see him in it. I turned my head slowly and was terrified to see him walking towards me, looking slightly upset. He stopped just a few steps away and resumed staring, this time with a clear hint of malice, still though in silence. My vision blurred as I fought back tears of despair. He wasn't going to let me go. The helplessness that I felt was unbearable, but I couldn't cry. I couldn't give up, and I had to find a way. I had to get home tonight. The prospect of what might happen to me any time now if I didn't was becoming all too real. My head was full of unanswered questions, regrets, and horrible scenarios. I wanted so badly to not have to think anymore, to not have to fight back the tears and stay composed. But I knew that this would be his cue to enact whatever messed up plan he had in mind. I couldn't let that happen. And then I saw the final tram approach, the only one that I could take now, and I got on as quickly as my trembling legs would allow me to. When I was in, bright lights enveloping me, my mind snapped out of its nightmarish spiral of fear, and it allowed me a moment of clarity. I had 3 stops to figure this out. I sat down at the front and looked at the driver. He was a frail old man, blissfully unaware of my distress. Getting the driver's attention was a no-go. We passed 1 stop, and there was nobody else waiting to climb aboard. I turned around, fully expecting to see that the psycho had followed me again. but I did not expect him to be sitting right behind me. He wasn't taking any chances. He was making sure that I wouldn't try anything like last time. I shot him a hateful glare and allowed my anger to overcome my fear. I stood up and purposefully walked over to another seat, in the middle of the tram car. I wanted to make it clear that I would not put up with his BS any longer. He got up too and slowly walked up to a spot 2 seats behind and diagonal from me, and then sat down with the tiniest arrogant grin on his face. Already expecting it, I shot up and stood by the middle door instead, determined to keep him on his toes. If I stood right by the door, he wouldn't have any idea which station I planned to get off at. He remained where he was at this time, convinced that I was bluffing. After all, this was really the last tram. There was nothing else that I could possibly do to escape now. He must have reckoned it too, so my defiance was only a funny act to him. This was my chance. I had to take the risk, and it had to work. There were 3 doors on the tram, and they all opened and closed at the same time, and they stayed open for around 5 seconds, before closing again if no buttons were pressed or people detected on the threshold. The next stop, the only one left before mine, came into view. The tram slowed to a stop. The doors open, and I made no move. 5 long seconds passed, and the doors started to close. I bolted out and I ran for it, reaching the back door as fast as I could, and slamming the button to open it again. My whole body was tense with adrenaline. I waited a long and painful second and I jumped back in, keeping my head low and holding my breath and crouching behind the nearest seat. I shut my eyes tightly and exhaled slowly while thanking the gods that I didn't believe in for that button working, and wishing with all my might for him to not have seen me before I got back in. As I was waiting to hear his footsteps approaching, I pictured him frantically looking for me. Was he still on the tram, face screwed up in anger, head turning like a fat and ugly meerkat? Or was he catching his breath on the pavement of the last station, mad eyes searching the darkness for me? As the tram continued its loud journey, banging and clanging in sync with my heartbeat, I dared smile to myself, imagining his face when he realized that he messed up. Hands on my chest, I did my best to stealthily look around the corner and found nobody looking back. I stood up in excitement and threw myself off the foggy back window. There he was, standing alone and victimless on that slowly fading out of sight station, watching me leave him and his vile plans behind. And giving somebody the middle finger never felt so good.